In this video, we're going to cover standalone PPSSPP installation on the Xbox Series X and S. PSP emulation on Xbox Series X and S is fantastic. It is a great way to experience the system, as well as use enhanced things like HD texture packs, and it's quick and easy to get set up, so let's go ahead and dive in. Now, before we get started, you are going to need an Xbox that is registered and set up for developer mode. This is an official operating mode from Microsoft that allows you to develop your own Xbox games, and it also allows you to sideload things like emulators, which is what we're using it for here today. We're not going to go over the steps on how to register for dev mode and get it set up. We already have a dedicated video for that, which I will have a link to in the description below. So you follow along with this video, you're able to get dev mode set up and running, and then you'll come back and follow along with this video. Also covered in the dev mode and RetroArch setup video is how to properly format a USB drive. Having a USB drive is very important, and it could be either a USB SSD, USB hard drive, USB thumb drive. Just note that if you want to do advanced things like texture packs in numerous emulators, having an external SSD is definitely preferred. I'll have a link down to the ones that I use in the description below if you don't happen to already have one. But they do need to be formatted in NTFS format with proper security permissions, and again, the initial dev mode and RetroArch setup video goes over that, but I also have 2 standalone videos for it as well if needed. Once you have your Xbox set up in dev mode, just get it booted up to your Xbox developer home screen. And we're going to head over to the Xbox Dev Store, so link to this will be in the description below. But we're just going to scroll down here to the emulator section, and we're going to find PPSSPP, and then just click on the download button. Once you have that downloaded, again, make sure that your Xbox is booted up to your dev mode home screen like this, and then look at your remote access panel and just type that address into your web browser on a separate computing device. And once you have finished getting that all typed in, you'll be brought to your Xbox device portal. So under the My Games and Apps tab here, we're going to click on Add. And now you could drag that PPSSPP package that you just downloaded into this little box here, click on Choose File, navigate to where you have it stored, and just select it. From here, click on Next. We don't have any dependency files for this one, so just click on Start to begin the installation process. And once finished, just click on Done. We are now finished with the Xbox device portal for this video, so you can go ahead and close out of it. Now back over on your Xbox, we're going to go ahead and set up PPSSPP to run as a game. Otherwise, it will not be able to take advantage of the full power we want it to. So just navigate down to it and click on the View button, back button, whatever you want to call it. Go down to View Details and change the UWP type from App to Game. And once done, I always like to restart the console just to make sure the change takes effect, but probably not necessary, but you do you. So now that the Xbox is rebooted, I'm just going to go ahead and turn my controller back on first. There we go. And we'll go ahead and make sure that change took effect. Sure enough, there it is. It is now a game, good to go. So now we're going to go ahead and add our PSP games into the mix. So go ahead and get your USB drive hooked up to your computing device of choice, so you can copy some PSP games over to it. Now, if you happen to have a large physical collection of PSP games, if you have a modded PSP, it is very easy to get those backed up to use with emulation projects like this, and I have a video on the channel for how to do so. Otherwise, you can resort to the Googles and other search engines and find things that way, but as always, illegal download links are not provided on this channel, so do not bother asking for it. Now, after you dump your PSP games, they're typically going to be in ISO format. That is just a full-size PSP game file, and that is A-OK. If you would like to save some space, you can convert them to CSO, which I have done here previously for other videos, and they also work. If you are interested in compressing your PSP games into CSO format, I will have a link to Max CSO in the description below. You just put it into the same directory as your PSP games and then drag them onto it, and it should compress them for you. But again, completely unnecessary unless you want to save some space on your drive. But once you have your PSP games all ready to go, again, get your Xbox USB drive plugged in and opened up. And if you use the Xbox Media tool, you should have a games folder in here. You can just navigate down to PSP, and then drag your games right inside. Otherwise, you could just kind of put them wherever the frick you want. It really doesn't matter. And there we go. All the games are now copied over. Perfect. There's one more thing we're going to do on this USB drive before we continue, and that is to create a PPSSPP memory stick folder. So we're just going to create a new folder in here and name it PPSSPP. And there we go. And with that, we're now ready to move our drive over to the Xbox, get PPSSPP set up so we can begin playing. So with our USB drives in place on the Xbox, go ahead and launch into PPSSPP. And the first time you boot up PPSSPP, it's going to ask you where you want to keep your PSP data. So we're going to go on Create or choose a PSP folder and select this. And now we're going to go over to OK. And it will bring up a file browser. So just go left, navigate down to the little USB icon here. Find your PPSSPP folder you just created, select it. Then just down and select this folder. And it will just say, hey, you selected ePPSSPP, free space, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, cool, okay. And there we go. So now all of our data is going to default to our USB drive, so we never have to worry about it getting deleted unless we do it ourselves. But now we're going to go ahead and set up a games folder. So just click down here and navigate to Browse. Press A. And then same deal as before. We're just going to click on this little USB icon. We're going to navigate to the games folder where we stored our PSP games. So again, I put mine inside this games folder that the Xbox Media Tool created. So I'm just going to go down to PlayStation Portable here. And now I'm just going to press the View button to quickly move over to select here and then select. And there we go. There are all of my games. And now we can easily just go down, press A on a game, and it will boot right up. But here we are playing PSP games on our Xbox Series S or X if you're using one of those. So very cool stuff. So there's a couple of cool hotkeys already set by default when you load up into PPSSPP on Xbox. So if you press the right trigger, you get a little fast forward mode. You can also activate alternate speeds by clicking down on the right thumbstick. And if you would like to access your in-game quick menu, you just press the left trigger. And that brings up your save states menu, as well as settings, create game config, display layout effects, and then exit back to the main menu. And then at any time, you can go back to your games list to see all of your PSP games. And if you're interested, you can also change the layout to like a list instead of the icons, like your preference, your choice here. Another cool thing is a Homebrew and Demos tab here. So if you're interested in PSP Homebrew, there's a PPSSPP Homebrew store where you can download a couple of Homebrew apps to play on PPSSPP. So just kind of cool stuff. Just select it, tell it to install. And there we go. Like, pretty fun stuff. Well, now let's take a moment to go over the settings that PPSSPP provides. So if we can navigate over to the right bar here, go to Settings. Our first option is Rendering Resolution. This is set to 2 times by default on Xbox Series X and S, but you can increase this up to very high internal resolutions. So select a resolution, and if it runs well for you, you could go ahead and stick with it. But if you have slowdowns where you didn't have them before, always make sure to just bring it back down to where it isn't going to cause a problem. Next up, software rendering. So this will give you an accurate representation of PSP video output. It is very demanding, so not likely going to be using it here on Xbox. Next, we have a full screen option. We don't need to enable this. It does it in Xbox automatically for us. VSync. If you want to reduce screen tearing, you leave this option on. Next up, display, layout, and effects. So this is where you're going to be able to enable things like integer scaling if you like to have as sharp of an output image as possible. But you could change your scaling filter between linear and nearest. Linear will give you a more blended appearance versus nearest, which is going to be pretty blocky. You can also apply some post-processing shaders. So you could go through these, see which ones you like, and apply them as desired. Also pretty cool that you could change the rotation of your emulated PSP for different games if needed. Next up, frame rate control. Frame skipping, we're going to go ahead and skip over all this because we're not going to need it. Under speed hacks, we're actually going to be ignoring most of this. The Xbox Series X and S is able to handle all this stuff as is. But under performance, render duplicate frames to 60 Hz. So if you're playing a 30 FPS game, you can get a perceived smoother output by duplicating frames to 60 Hz. So personal preference on if you want to use this one or not. Buffer graphic commands. This increases emulation speed at the expense of some input lag. It's not anything major that I've ever experienced, but you can change this from up to 2 to up to 1 or disable it entirely, depending on your preferences. Go ahead and leave hardware transform on and software skinning on. Next, hardware tessellation. You can enable this and see if it helps in performance or appearance in any of your games. It's off by default, but again, try it out, see what you think. Next, we have texture scaling, so you could choose between the upscale type of XBRZ, Hybrid by Cubic, and Hybrid Plus by Cubic. Each has its own distinct advantages in 2D and 3D titles, so go ahead and mess with each as you desire. And once selected, you could choose the upscale level between off and then up to 5 times. So if you don't want to mess with texture upscaling at all, you could just leave this set to off and you don't have to worry about it. But if you do turn on upscaling, make sure to turn on deposterize to get rid of any unwanted banding or glitches in upscaled textures. Next up, texture filtering. Anisotropic filtering is set to 16x by default, but you can lower it or turn it off if desired. Texture filtering, this is set to auto, but you can choose between nearest linear and auto max quality. So honestly, best results, auto has worked pretty good. Don't really have to mess with it. But if you want to set this on a per game basis to get the best look for every title to your desires, there it is. Next up, smart 2D texture filtering. So if you are playing primarily 2D sprite-based games, recommend turning this option on to get the sharpest output possible out of them. Now, lower resolution for effects. This is something I like to enable, and I just change it over to safe. But basically, this is for, say, like an explosion effect that is supposed to make the screen appear blurry or something. So when you're up-resing your games, it doesn't quite look right, so this will kind of help that appearance to be more accurate to an actual PSP. But again, personal preference if you want to have that on or not. And finally, in this menu, we have a trio of overlay things. So we could turn on an FPS counter, speed counter, or a debug overlay. So personal preference if you want to use any of those. But moving on, controls. So you can map the controls any way you want for your emulated PSP. It has a default that is mapped 1-to-1 with a PSP, so you could just use that and be perfectly good. But again, if you need to change anything up, you do so right in here. Next up, calibrate analog stick. So if you're going to be using a single Xbox controller, you could get that really tuned in to match a PSP's analog stick. So you could set things like dead zone. You can just basically lower this as much as possible to avoid any drift and get more responsive controls as a result. So that's a lot better. And then you can adjust the sensitivity. Something like that. And then you can also set the threshold for analog triggers, but you won't be using these during gameplay with the default controls, so not really a big deal. And then we have a couple options for keyboard that we're not going to worry about. Anyway, audio. Make sure that you don't turn off your sound, but if you'd like to lower the volume, you could do so here. Then you could also lower reverb volume, and then for alternate speed volume, you can essentially just turn this off if desired. That way it just doesn't sound all weird. And then if you have retro achievements enabled, you can have an achievement unlock sound. Next up, networking. So if you are planning to play your PSP games online, you're going to need to enable networking/WLAN. And then if you are going to be playing, you're going to need to know the address for the ad hoc server that you're going to be using. So the default one that's listed in PPSSPP is SOCOM.cc. You're able to change this to any as needed. And then you're also going to want to enable UPnP. And it's also worth noting that if you have a PSP on the same network as your Xbox, you actually can LAN play with it. You're just going to need to change a couple of settings like the port offset and then use original port But if you are interested in PPSSPP online multiplayer, I recommend checking out the ad hoc multiplayer forums on the official PPSSPP forum. Link to this will be in the description below, and it will help you get things more fine-tuned to your specific games. So moving on, tools section, retro achievements. If you are a fan of retro achievements like I am, this is where you're going to get everything logged in to use for retro achievements. So just enter in your username and password, and once done, click on login. And there we go, logged in. So now we can enable or disable achievements, disable hardcore mode, and then our achievement sound effects. But you're also able to customize the position of different things. So top left, top right, just anything that you desire. And then there's also the development tools, but you shouldn't need these on Xbox. But we also have access to a save data manager, so it has all of our game saves listed, as well as save states if you have any. Look at system information on the Xbox. Now in developer tools, this is where you can see your texture replacement options. So the first one, save new textures. So if you want to dump any PSP textures to make an HD texture pack, you technically can use the Xbox to do that. And then next we have replace textures, which is on by default. So now I'm going to show you how to install an HD texture pack into PPSSPP on the Xbox. So the first thing we're going to do is actually just go ahead and quit out of PPSSPP. And move our USB drive back over to a computer so we can put texture packs on it. So PPSSPP has an official texture pack thread on its forums that I'll have linked down below, so you can just scroll through this until you find your game, if there's an HD texture pack for it, that is. Get it downloaded, and then I'll show you two methods on how to get these installed. So I'm going to be using an HD texture pack for Mega Man Maverick Hunter X, as well as Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions. So again, just make sure you have your Xbox USB drive hooked up to your computer and opened up. So we're going to do the manual installation method first. So Mega Man Maverick Hunter HD texture pack here. We're just going to get this extracted. Going to open up that folder, and inside there is a folder with just the game region code here. So inside our PPSSPP folder, there's a PSP folder, go in there, and then you'll see textures. And we're just going to drag this game region folder into the textures folder, and that is now ready to go. But now when we load up Mega Man Maverick Hunter X, you can see we now have a lot sharper representation on a lot of things. Obviously not FMVs. But yeah, it's looking really good with the HD texture pack installed. Combined with 1080p output. Now as for our other method of installing HD texture packs, here we have the Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions HD texture pack, and it is in zip format, so we're just going to go ahead and grab this and just drag it over to our USB drive for our Xbox. Doesn't really matter where it goes, just put it on there. So now inside PPSSPP, we are going to go over to the right side here and click on load. We're going to navigate down to that USB icon. And we're going to select the Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions zip, or our HD texture pack zip. And it's going to ask you if you want to install textures from the zip file. So I'm going to tell it to delete the zip file when it's done, but now I'm just going to tell it to install. And we're just going to wait for it to do its thing. But once that install is complete, you just click on the back button here, and we can load up the game and enjoy the HD texture pack. But moving on to our settings here. So under the developer tools option, we're not really going to be messing with much else here. So you can see that the CPU core is set to Dynarec. You want to leave it on that. See that there's just a bunch of other settings here, but again, we're not really going to be messing with any of this. Next up, System tab. So this is where you could change the UI language between any language that you might need. You could turn on UI sounds if you want. You could set the background, transparent background. Change the background animations, change the theme, set your memory stick folder like we did at the beginning of our PPSSPP configuration. You can also change the size of your memory stick, so if you want to increase this to like 32 gigs, if you're going to be installing DLC, you can do so. Under the emulation tab, fast memory, ignore bad memory access, I/O timing, force real clock, change emulated PSP clock speed, so this is where you could change it to like 333 megahertz for every game if you want to, but really don't need to mess with it. If you're using save states, you can auto load save states on load. Cache full ISO into RAM, this is good if you're using a slower drive. And then we can also enable cheats and plugins, and then just a bunch of other settings you're really not going to need to mess with just to play games. But let's go ahead and cover cheat setup real quick. So once again, we're just going to go ahead and quit out of PPSSPP here and move our drive back over to a computer. So back over on a computer, we're going to head over to Sarah Margrian's GitHub page, and this is a CW cheat database that you can load up in PPSSPP to get cheats for tons of games. So a link to this will be in the description below, but we're just going to click on cheat.db, and right here where it says raw, just on this line right here, we're going to click on the download raw file button, and that will give us a cheat.db file. Now we're just going to add this file to our PPSSPP folder, PSP folder cheats, and just load it in right there, and that is now good to go. So we can just go ahead and close out of this, move it back over to our Xbox. Now back in PPSSPP, get loaded up into a game and access your quick menu. On the right side, you'll see cheats, and we're going to import from PSP cheats, cheats.db, and bam, there we go. So that cheats database file has been read, and you are now able to select cheats. To enable and disable as you desire. And so there we go. Now we have the full charge shot as we begin the game, like just ridiculous stuff. And so you just repeat this process on all of your games, and if they're in that database, it will have cheats ready to go for you. Now for any additional settings that you want to set on a per game basis, you can go into the settings tab while you're playing a game and adjust anything you need to get the game to look like you want. And then you can create a game config file for that game by selecting the create game config file in the quick menu. But with that, we have now gone over everything that PPSSPP has to offer on the Xbox Series X and S. Again, great way to experience your PSP games on the Xbox hardware, with a lot of nice extras while you're at it. But thank you so much as always for watching today's tutorial. Hope you have found it informative and it helps you get your PSP emulation projects up and running on Xbox Series X and S hardware to your desires. Here at the end, the usual favors to ask. If you haven't already, thumbs up, thumbs down, depending on how much you like today's video. And please be sure to hit that sub button and notification bell if you haven't already, so you can see when new content goes live on the channel, as there is always a ton coming your way. For anyone interested in further helping support the channel to keep it going, please be sure to check out that join button here on YouTube or the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Every little bit helps keep us going and bringing more content just like this to all of you. Big shout out to all of our current backers. Thank you so incredibly much for just continuing to believe in what we do here and help us keep it going. But until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, you all stay awesome, keep on gaming, and we'll see you back next video.